Good morning. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. I'm used to they're not answering in New England, but not here. So I wanted a little reassurance. It's wonderful to be back in Naptown, as it was called when I was growing up here. And graduated from Shortridge High School and swam at the IAC and danced at the Indiana Roof. And when I come back, I hardly recognize the place. But there is something about Indiana that never changes. And you've heard some of those things from the previous speakers. I'm excited and I'm nervous about what they've asked us to take on. Also because you need a break, I suspect. I'm your last speaker before break. So hang in there with me for a little bit while we do some work on a problem that my hunch is you've thought about and think maybe you need a little bit of a primer on it because it fits into the entire topic that we're discussing in this forum, which has to do with new partnerships. So far, we have not heard the name father. We've heard parents, haven't heard it. And it has a lot to do with the way that we see the problem. Ryan has asked us to stop looking at the problems in the way we used to, and I'm going to follow his excellent advice. And I'm going to start off with a question for you, which I'm going to try and answer in the question and answer. Should there be a dad's helpline? Would it matter? Has it ever occurred to you? Would it change? Would it move the needle? So that's what we're going to be talking about for a while. And I'm hoping that by the time we're done with our discussion, you will think a little bit differently about the spaces that you work in, the people that you talk to, the mothers that you talk to, and the babies that you hold in your hearts as the chief concern that we have for the well-being of the children of Indiana. Parenting, mothering, and fathering. Is it different? Not on this list. They share every single one of these traits. Sensitivity is the most important one up there. You could forget the rest of the bullets. I know what you need. You're tired, don't you? You're hungry. You've had enough. Stop passing him around. He's done. Let's just have some quiet time. Are you a little bored, aren't you? Let's play. Let's do something interesting. How do you get to know your baby that way? Time with them, and time with them that matters. Those are very different. It's not related to the amount of hours you spend with your children. It's what you do when you're with them. Making children feel adored, loved, and valued. We would all agree with that. Sustaining strong values. The Smith family always believes this. This is the way we treat each other. Love your neighbor. Disciplining to teach. We get confused about this one. I want to remind you that discipline comes from the root word disciple. It means to learn, not to punish. Affirming uniqueness and expecting competence. You've got a lot of talent in you, a lot of strength. I love who you are. Let's just keep doing the best you can. We'll help and stay with you. Affirming uniqueness, promoting education as a process. Not simply one that has happened in school, but one that happens around the dining table, actually in front of the television, I'm sorry to say, and on our lovely little screens. Education, all television is educational television, even if it's Jerry Springer or the presidential debates. Hard to tell the difference these days, I understand. Being an abiding presence, whatever comes, thick, thin, good, bad. You don't run in your room and slam the door. You stay with your kids. And parenting is a risky business. It's actually rather hard on marriages. And anybody in the room who's either not married or not had kids yet, you might want to turn your head away from this next slide, because this is a slide that shows what happens to marital satisfaction when you become a parent. These are 4 different international studies, and you can see, you don't need to be, a math expert to tell what direction this is going. And we stop at 14.5 because that's discouraging enough. And it starts to go up again, those of you older folks in the room. It starts to go back up again when they start to look at colleges and think about going away. But there's work to be done. Why do you think you see all those used RVs on the road? They're looking for each other. They're looking for each other. So that's hard work. Parenting is hard work, and it's tough on your relationship. Why am I talking about the relationship already? Because mothering and fathering, when you do it together, creates a whole different partnership. We're not talking couples. We're talking co-partners, co-parents, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So, how do children even experience men? I mean, most of the wonderful pictures that you see of mothers and babies give us a warm glow. Whenever we see a picture of a father with a baby, we go, oh, yeah, that happens too. Where do you think babies come from? It's a partnership. Even if it's one night or a lifetime, it's a partnership. And that child has in their mind, in their head, the idea that they came from two people. They learn it in school, they learn it from other families, and so even though you have a single mother sitting in front of you who may not have a father or a name on a birth certificate, we'll talk about the importance of that in a minute, father for her child, the child is in a different orbit. They know there's somebody else, even if they don't know who he is at the particular moment and particular time, and it's important that we honor that concern. So, all right. So how do children even experience men? Because men do not mother any more than mothers father. We are very engaged in a change in our discussion because of the importance across the world of understanding the first 3 years of life. Powerful predictor of later health and competence. Economists are interested in this, physicians, nurses, all of you in this room are interested in this. If you start early, you get less wrong. So, how do children experience men? Interestingly, it's not just the mother who is getting ready for the labor and delivery physically, so is the father. About 8 years ago, we were doing some thyroid prediction studies in the university where I work, and we just happened to do a panel of hormones. We were looking at thyroid in mothers and fathers during pregnancy, at the time of labor and delivery, and after. And we happened to include oxytocin, testosterone, and estrogen, and found some very surprising things. Testosterone level goes down in men before they're having a baby. What do you need it for, right? Estrogen goes up. Well, you're not going to be breastfeeding, so what do you need that for? We're not quite sure, but there is something about softening that occurs with estrogen, not just simply skin, but also tissues and maybe even attitudes. But the big surprise was oxytocin. I don't know how much you know about this hormone. It's sometimes called the relationship hormone. It's roaring in your veins when you have your first puppy love experience. And it seems to, we call it the relationship hormone because it seems to always be in high levels when you are engaging with someone emotionally intensely. What a great thing to have on board when you're becoming a parent. And it is one of the things that we think may be at work when that father who happens to be at the labor and delivery for whatever reason, either he's done his prenatal work or he hasn't, but there he is. You know, he's not too engaged until he sees that baby, and suddenly he's ready to lay down in front of a truck for it. How does that happen? The nurses are surprised. The mothers are surprised. Are we taking advantage of those moments? That's the bee I want to put in your bonnet. High incidence of paternal postpartum depression. Paternal postpartum depression. We're not even managing maternal postpartum depression very well. And Dr. Pruett, you want us to be thinking about sad fathers? Well, for every 2 postpartum depressed mothers, there is 1 postpartum depressed father. And if you don't look for him, her depression is not going to get any better no matter how much medication you throw at her, because she's connected to a man who is at the bottom of his well. And she can't get better. How often are we screening for postpartum depression in men? Are you kidding? Didn't even know it existed. Well, it does. Father's vocabulary is a stronger predictor than mother's of language competence at 36 months. Yes, you need to read that again. You don't believe it. I didn't either the first time I saw it. Duke Research Group put this together. Why would that be? Men don't talk. Well, when they do to their babies, they use less mother-ese. Oh, so cute. They don't do that so much. They're likely to use full sentences, even paragraphs. And And all the women think he's just clueless. He doesn't know a thing about babies. But if you ask the father why he's doing that, they'll often say, you know, I know you like that little cuddly talk, but he's going to hear these words, and he's going to have to understand those words when he gets older, so I'm going to use them. And so that may be what's going on here. Father's vocabulary as a predictor. So is this stuff common knowledge? No. And the reason I'm talking about it is to raise your consciousness about what it is that fathers have to contribute. Here's a surprise. Primary task of every society to teach men how to father. Margaret Mead, the greatest anthropologist of the last century. And I didn't even know she said this until a graduate student of mine came up and said, and I share it with you because I don't know what it means. Maybe you'll think it through a little bit, figure out what you think it means. But is it that if men do not care about the well-being of their children, their society will not survive? Is it that the women need the father's support in order to do the incredibly difficult jobs that they have to do? Is it that you will descend into warlike and aggressive society if you are not aware of the other component of your humanity as expressed in your parenting? I don't know what she meant, but I want you to think about it because she's one of the smartest people to have ever studied the human condition. Remember that marital satisfaction slide? I think this is the problem. We've got moms. This is a triangle of all the research directions we've taken over the years. Mother-child, infant attachment, all the work that we've done. It's why you have a mother's helpline instead of a dad's helpline. You know the traffic goes both directions. You know, upset baby, upset mom, mom's upset, baby gets upset. You know the traffic. We know about mothers' relationships with fathers. It can promote, it can be discouraging of parenting. We also know about the relationship between the fathers and the babies, which I'll be telling you a little bit more, some of my own research and others that have said that what fathers do with children is quite different, and yet it matters deeply. So, but the traffic I'm most interested in is in the center. The mother-father relationship, if it's good, takes a lot of stress off that baby. If it's bad, it puts stress on the baby. Babies as young as three months can respond to co-parental stress. So you can't wait till 2 to decide this marriage isn't going to work. If it isn't, you know, the baby's already noticing it 3 months. Mother, she can make that father-child relationship hum along like a windmill. Or she can throw a monkey in the works, wrench in the works, and say, he's a jerk, I don't want you near him. I think you're wonderful, keep it up. I want you to do it exactly the way my dad did, which is not the way you're doing it, fix it. That's what I want. So she can either promote it or she can discourage it. The child also has, by the way, some influence. If the child's colicky, got sleep troubles, not eating very well, can make mom and dad feel very discouraged. Even if they're not married, they can make them feel like they don't know what they're doing. And finally, the father can make the mother-child relationship hum along, or he can be substance abusing, he can be engaged in interpersonal violence, he can make life hell for them. And sure enough, that will be tough. So when we're talking about a mother's helpline, which is absolutely a wonderful idea, you don't have the whole map in front of you, okay? To use Ryan's wonderful visualizations. Okay. So, some of the problems, some of the issues. Do we have any evidence that men even get children? Do they respond to them? Room about this size, Michael Lamb, one of the early researchers, showed an 8-minute video of 3 colicky babies to a group of non-parents, half men, half women, young adults, in a room like this, to prove that women respond more sensitively physiologically to an upset baby. The reason we're talking about it 30 years later is because it didn't prove that. Men were just as distressed physiologically in their bodies as the mothers. What they did about it was quite different. After Michael turned off the projector, the men got up and went off to the next class. The women stayed there for 2 hours and said, oh my God, is it that bad? I'm never having children. I can't believe the way I feel. You feel that way? What about you? You know, and they didn't. So The biological equity question is a sneaky one. Touch and smell recognition. Fathers were used as a control in a study where mothers who had newborns, 48 hours after the babies were born, went into a hospital and tried to find their babies in the newborn nursery simply by touch and smell. They were blindfolded, they had earplugs in their ears, and the fathers were used as a control because it was assumed the mothers would do a better job. We're talking about it 20 years later because they did exactly the same job. The fathers are just as good as the mothers. Okay? So, men, your excuses are disappearing. Evidence that children respond directly to men. 6-week-olds. You remember what 6-week-olds look like? I mean, they're just barely leaving newborn status. They are already responding differentially to mothers and fathers. Split-screen video studies show the baby being picked up by the mother, and what you see when the mother goes to approach the baby is the baby's eyes kind of relax and her shoulders slump down, heart and respiratory rates, mom. That's what you see. You also see something similar on the mother's face. Father, what do you see? You see the eyes open, shoulders hunch up, heart and respiratory rates go up. 6 weeks. Dad, party time. Or whatever. We don't know what we don't know what that is. But it's already in the baby to be thinking differently about these two people. Another thing toddlers do with fathers is that they use more of their beginning speech to talk about what they need with them. This really irritates mom because she's cutting corners, she reads the mind, the juice is in the cup before the baby even looks at the refrigerator. And the father is there and the kid's banging up, what do you want? And it's not that he's clueless, he has a job. If you want something, speak up, say what you need. They're not going to be reading your mind like that when you go to Purdue. That's the way it starts. How does it work out over time in terms of maternal and paternal behavior? And by the way, when I'm talking about fathers, I'm not implying they're biological fathers. I am talking about the men the mother has chosen to parent this child with. That can be a stepfather, it could be a grandfather, it could be some other partner in the woman's life that she is sharing this role with, and they all have them. How often do we ask about it in the prenatal visit when a woman comes alone? Who's your other person? Maybe they should come with you to the next visit. Well, I'm not married. Doesn't matter. Who's your person? He's not even my husband. Or he's not even the father of the baby. But if he's your person, I want him in here. So, preference for activation, stimulation versus style. You've seen this happen. You may not have recognized it. When mothers pick up their babies, 9 times out of 10, it's this. Right here, snuggled in, warm. I feel comfortable when I do it. 9 times out of 10, what's predictable about the father is that it's unpredictable. You don't know what he's going to toss that baby up in the air. He may bring that baby more often here than here. This is called the football position in most Big Ten states, of course. But this is a different way to see the world than this is. This is in the safe house of the icebreaker, nice and warm and comfortable. This is on the bow. We're going to see where we're going together. I had a dad from Texas once say, "Yeah, my kid's my hood ornament." And he meant it. He was very proud of that. So activation, stimulation, fathers enjoy that. Mothers, not so much. Preparation for place in the world versus relationships, real world discipline versus relational discipline. When a mother is disciplining a child she's unhappy with, she makes the point, you and I are not friends right now. And you're going to have to work to get back in there. When a father's disciplining a kid, cut that out. They send people for jail around that out here, and you're never going to have any friends or get a job, so just knock it off. And there's no point talking to him any further about it because that's all he's going to say. But the two styles are quite important, especially when they're woven together, because they're both absolutely right. Of course there's an emotional cost to misbehavior. There's also a real-world cost to misbehavior. And when you weave the two together, children begin to get the sense they're being cared for, they're being adored, they're being protected, and things are going to be all right if the two of these people are going to be in my corner. Frustration tolerance versus facilitating. I was doing Ryan's encouraging us to tell stories. I'm going to tell a story about a 31-month-old child who came to me, had a speech delay, and I was talking to her and her mother. I was trying to figure out what her frustration tolerance was, and so I gave her a puzzle, which is a standardized puzzle. It's about 8 pieces, and it has no frame around it, so it's tough to do. There's no hints about the shape around the outside. You have to understand what the puzzle looks like and work from there. She couldn't do it. She was so for can't do, because the last piece was stuck under the right elbow over here. I could see that because I'm in a one-way mirror. I'm over here, child's here, mother's here. There's a one-way mirror with all my students behind. And so she's very frustrated. The mother sees the piece, the same time I do. She doesn't know I see this. And she leans over, puts her arm around the child like this to block my view, and flicks the puzzle piece onto the table. And the child says, oh, I do. The child finishes it. Mother won't look at me for the rest of the session. But she's done what mothers have done for 400,000 years. She's tipping the playing field in the direction of the child. Why frustrate them? Let them feel good about themselves, right? Dad, situation like that, he's much more likely to sit back and say, you can do it. I've seen you do this at home. Frustration builds, tears. And finally the child sits back. There's the piece. Dad says, I knew you could do it. So the two styles, once again, we're talking about building a resilient context around this child. Strong support for autonomy and independence, basically the bottom line. That's what the dads are really up to. You've heard a lot about attachment theory in your life. Attachment to mom is very different than attachment to dad. And it's not that it's less important. In fact, when I tell you what it is, you realize it's very important, and you recognize the kids who have been missing it their whole lives. Secure attachment to mother provides comfort when the child is distressed. That's its job. Father provides security during monitored, controlled excitement when child's exploratory system is aroused. What's that look like? It's a lot of words. This was told to me by an Arabic father in Abu Dhabi that I was working with, a group of parents. He had a child who was about 2.5, who loved to play with him when he got home at the end of the day and run his fingers through his beard. And he and his kid were playing, and the father encourages roughhouse. Mothers do not encourage roughhouse. You know, you've already used my body, thank you very much. I don't need to be a jungle gym. You can do that with him. He needs to get to know that about you. I already know that about you. So the roughhousing stuff, one of the big differences between, so this kid was playing on his dad's body, and he had his fingers in the beard, and the kid just decided to pull for all he was worth. All of a sudden, impulse, toddlers, right? And the father said, ouch, don't do that. And the boy gets sort of scared and backs off a little bit. And a couple of minutes later, he comes back, tries it again. And the father said, you are out of here. You must leave this room. That really hurt. You can play, but you cannot hurt me. And the kid went over, starts to cry, sits in the corner. Mother's horrified by this. She can hardly, and said, don't. He just sort of waved her off. And the kid sat in the corner, and he came back, and he sat on the father, and the father's looking at him. And he says to Daddy, sorry, can I do it again? And the father said, now you know how hard to do it. And so the boy did it. He pulled a little bit, didn't hurt the father. And knowing where that edge is an absolute bellwether of paternal engagement. Where's the line? When you cross it, I'm going to talk about it. Think of all the young people in your juvenile delinquency issues that have never known where that line was and why they're asking teachers, preachers, police to show them where the line is. So, most important slide I'm going to show you. Well, maybe the second one. Maybe the second most important. Child outcomes of involved fathering. And again, I'm talking about fathering because I'm talking about the person that the mother has partnered with to raise her child. Behavioral outcomes. Reduce contact with juvenile justice. Remember what I told you about knowing where the edge is? Delay in initial sexual activity and reduce teen pregnancy. Great outcome. If you're loved by your father and your mother, you're not going to be looking for love in all the wrong places. Reduced rates of divorce. Almost needs no explanation. Less reliance on aggressive conflict resolution. Remember those words you learned from your mom and your dad? You're less likely to go with your feet and your fists when you're in trouble. You can actually talk your way out of it. Educational. Higher grade completion and income. Better outcomes than No Child Left Behind got. Math competence in girls. First 270 undergraduates who went to MIT as girls had very involved fathers. And they weren't all nuclear physicists. Some of them were driving buses for Boston. Verbal strengths in boys and girls. Again, another surprise because men don't talk. But I do think it has to do with the way that men do communicate with their children. Emotional changes, greater problem-solving competence and stress tolerance, greater empathy, moral sensitivity, and reduced gender stereotyping. That is a remarkable list of outcomes. That's 300 different studies put together, I hope in a fashion that the Cincinnati Cradle folk would find acceptable, because it's packaged. And now that you know this, you cannot not know it. Doesn't just change the children, changes the fathers. Adult outcomes, increased longevity, they live longer, although I know it doesn't feel like that when you're doing it. Length of marriage strengthens marriages, level of health. Health department very interested in this. The actuaries actually shown about 8 years ago that men should start getting lower insurance rates once they become fathers. Because less accidental deaths, less suicide, they change jobs less often, and they are less aggressive in impulse. They just stay out of trouble. How does it happen? We now have evidence that becoming a father changes a father's brain. And it changes it in really interesting ways. In the areas where bonds, emotional bonds, are made between people, not just the baby. You often hear that from mothers. He's just kind of more chill. He's a better person than he was. I kind of like the things about him. He's a lot more tired. Maybe I like that about him too. I don't know. Auditory processing, especially with the baby's own cry. In other words, when they hear emotionally laden noises, they're better at reading them. And discriminating between crying and laughing as a result of that. So, you know, we don't think adults' brains can change very much after about the age of 22. Parenting changes you. And by the way, it changes the father's brain more than it changes the mother's brain. Maybe that's what Margaret Mead had in mind. Risks to fatherhood are everywhere. Unemployment, particularly. When a father loses his job, he instantly feels like a lousy father. When a mother loses her job, she may feel a little scared economically, but she doesn't feel like a lousy mother. It's very different. Inexperience, I don't know what I'm doing. Nobody talked to me. They ignored me completely at the prenatal call. No one told me how to wash a baby. No one told me how to change a baby. Isolation, I'm the only person that feels this way. Exclusion from the child's life, which we do all the time through that isolation. You know, early boys in middle school being taught something about parenting. The ripest time for them to learn, and it's a joke in most schools. Divorce. Gatekeeping. What do I mean by gatekeeping? The mother's ownership of the baby. What she's entitled to, given what she's gone through to deliver that child and make that child, maybe even endure the relationship with the person she's making with. I don't know how bad it is or how good it is. But she often feels, and society supports this in her, that there only needs to be a mother's helpline because we're it. We're all that matters. Okay? Can't think that way after these slides. Childcare, healthcare, education settings, us, all of us who interact, sorry, that's the next slide, who interact with mothers about the well-being of their children, if we are not mindful that that child has another parent, it is very easy to appropriately take care of her needs. But it's inappropriate to pretend that he does not exist in the child's life. And yet we reinforce that every time we put up a mother-baby poster and we don't have a father-baby poster. We only have mothers' magazines in the waiting room. We don't have a Field and Stream. When a mother shows up for a prenatal visit that the father was supposed to be there for and he doesn't come, do we reschedule? No, we're happy to see her. Do we give her information for him? Sometimes. Do we check see that she gave it to him? Not very often. And whenever we do that, we are colluding with his disappearance. He just shifts further and further into the background. So, infant mortality, that's what this group has been worried about for 4 years. I'm going to nail together a couple of posters for you, some science, that ties infant mortality quite directly to paternal engagement. The huge impact of prenatal involvement by the father, especially when encouraged by the mother and us. The best study ever done on unmarried parents, the Fragile Family Study, 5-year study, 1,600 unmarried, mostly urban fathers, high percentage of urban African-American fathers, showed prenatal involvement significantly and positively associated with paternal engagement at 12 and 36 months. Okay? You understand what that says? These men started off in their babies' lives. They came to prenatal visits. They had to. They were rewarded for it in the study. And when they came, they wanted to be involved with those babies at the age of 1 and at the age of 3. Were they? Typically not, because of issues that had changed in the mother's family and the fact that the father received no support from anybody, in fact, active discouragement. But he started off mindful about the well-being of that infant. And we missed our opportunities to keep him close. And if we had kept him close, we're going to be changing things like infant mortality. Because spacing, smoking, and sleep doesn't need to just be understood by women. How often do we ask if the father's a smoker? We need to be asking. Does the father understand that spacing baby's father is better for the baby, not to mention farther apart, better for him? We often don't encourage that. So we leave all this information on her shoulders alone to implement. Some of these improvements are partially explained by employment and cohabitation. If the father has a decent job, he's more likely to stay around and be a provider. If the parents live together, it's likely that he's going to be able to act on those early impulses. If they don't, it's going to be harder, but not impossible, especially if he has social supports to do so. So, does this matter to your Hoosier battle against infant mortality? Very important American study, national study of the association between paternal involvement, infant mortality, and racial disparities. You heard some of these numbers from Jerry's discussion. If father's first or last name are on the birth certificate, that's the only variable in this study. First and last name on the birth certificate. Black women and engaged fathers had a twofold increase of infant mortality over Hispanic women with engaged fathers. And by engaged father, all I'm talking about is his name is on the birth certificate, first and last. The implication is that he mattered enough to the mother to have his name there, or that he matters enough to the baby to make sure it's there, or that he really is engaged. Black women and absent fathers, 7-fold increase in infant mortality over over black women with present fathers. And Hispanic women, absent fathers, had a 4-fold increase. Those are enormous numbers. And they are such an at-risk population that we need to treat them differently. But remember the Fragile Family Study? That was about these very people. Paternal absence widens the black-white gap in infant mortality almost fourfold. So I would add a fourth piece to Ryan's 3 S's, and that would be the concept of supporting the father's engagement in prenatal time, because that is going to move your needle in a very important way. Look at the data. 65 to 75% of excess mortality could be prevented with increased paternal involvement. 2/3 to 3/4. And intervention programs shown to improve paternal engagement, decrease absent father and infant mortality association, home visiting, prenatal care, prenatal classes. Nurses. The nursing perspective on this is very important and very illuminating, and the University of Washington has a very fine school of nursing, and they've been cranking out research for years on the issue that relates paternal engagement, in paternal engagement. Prenatal class attendance positively predisposes fathers to fathering. In other words, they're more likely to want to do it because they're going to know some things about how to do it. Men hate picking up a toolbox they can't use. So teach them how to bathe the baby. Teach them how to change a diaper. Most important impact, however, is the support the mother feels from his presence. Okay? So it's not just about what's going on between. Remember the triangle? Attendance at birth, however, is more impactful than prenatal class preparation on men. There used to be a rule that if you didn't go to prenatal classes, you couldn't be at the labor and delivery. Dumb idea. You miss the oxytocin level. You miss the way she feels about his support. She will require less anesthesia. She will be in labor a shorter period of time, and she will have fewer birth complications if he's there. Are we supporting him by making sure he can leave his job and get there and not penalize him? Not so much. But what a great public health moment that is. Talk about collaboration. That's rowing in the same shell. Positively related to physical engagement with the baby, how does this work? They can feel connected to the baby's body, and they carry the baby in their mind. The mentalization of the relationship is much stronger when they are there at the labor and delivery at 3 and 12 months. And, of course, overall measures of child well-being improve. Breastfeeding in dads. A lot of nurses would rather not deal with this. Many are very good at it. But you have to think about whether it's going to matter. This was an Australian study called Dads Make a Difference. Mothers need the dad's support to stick with it. It's hard to stick with breastfeeding. It's tough, it's difficult, it's inconvenient, especially if you have a life. Fathers want to be involved, but they're uncertain as how. Kind of sounds like the mothers. A little timely help from us goes a very long way. Moms appreciated his encouragement. They loved the fact that he was committed to them and to the baby's well-being. The dads felt closer to the women that had mothered their children, parented their children, and they also felt closer to the baby. The rate of breastfeeding at 6 months doubled when fathers attended a single 2-hour prenatal session focused on breastfeeding. And it wasn't just how to do it, it was about why to do it and how to help the mother when she got discouraged and how to help the mother when you got discouraged. Money in the bank. Okay, so how do we go about doing this? How father-friendly would you call your programs right now? Do you have a good reputation in the community as having a door that's open to men as well as to women? I know there are some programs in Indiana, Indiana Families, Healthy Starts Families. You've got some Fathers and Families programs going on in Marion County. They're quite good. They're not specifically focused on co-parenting. They're focusing on positively engaging men, which is a start, but it is not the map. Address maternal gatekeeping. What's maternal gatekeeping? You already heard me. Maternal gatekeeping happens in the home. It happens in the Capitol. It happens in the Department of Health. It happens in the superintendent's office. It's about decisions that you're making about children and mothers that are based on the mother's feeling like she owns the baby and all they need. So, there's negative gatekeeping, but there's also positive gatekeeping. We have one of the interesting concerns we have when we start talking about engaging dads and men is domestic violence comes up, interpersonal violence, concern about it. Well, safety first, safety first, safety first. If the father's not safe around the children, you don't want to be including programs that engage him. So safety first, always, that never changes. But there's personal violence and there's interpersonal violence. You may not be aware that almost 50% of the episodes of interpersonal violence are actually initiated by mothers, by women. They're not as physically violent, but they may start with the slap or the hit or the scratch or the slam the door in the face. It's when the man follows up with his power and strength that it becomes really more lethal. But unless you understand IPV as an interrelated phenomenon, you're going to be evicting an awful lot of men from the lives of children who not only need them, but she also needs them too. So that has to be, you got to watch your knee-jerk reactions to it. Investigate it, think it through, support it. And in fact, IPV is a treatable illness. Programs help. Men can get better. Women can get better. So, engaging fathers positively rather than, we'll just make sure you're safe first and then we'll get you engaged. You have a lot to give your kid, the way you hold him, the way you play with him. There's nothing wrong with that. It's sensational the way it makes him feel, and it'll get him ready for the world in ways that are actually more helpful to him than some of the things his mom's doing. So when mothers begin to calm down about some of those issues, the men feel supported, and guess what happens? The babies and the infants and the toddlers and the children's behavior starts to stabilize and improve. You got to address the father's needs. Job, most important. Responsibility. His father, his relationship with his father, his peers. What do they think of the job he's doing? You have to ask explicitly. Why do men come to programs? Because you invite them, not through their spouses, but you invite them. I want you to come. It helps if you have males on your staff. Susan Schultz, who's the CEO of a WIC program in Kenosha, Wisconsin, who is going to be speaking a little bit later, is a hero in this regard. She hired a guy, moved him from part-time to full-time, changed paternal engagement overnight in radical ways, and said, you know, women can go just so far, but with our population, we need a man in here that could help the men feel like they belong, and also help the women stay kind of calm about the presence of men in a WIC program. WIC program. Not PIC, it's WIC. So that's using local talent. And then don't forget about prevention, parental leave, breastfeeding, all the things we've already talked about. So, involvement advice for men. There are a few in this room. I notice about one at every fifth table. Welcome, gentlemen. You're not alone. Involvement advice for men. Not just these, but the one you work for. Practice your children's routines. Appreciates what's unique about fathering and mothering. Get more involved emotionally. Don't keep it all in. Enjoy that bond with that baby. Let him change your world and your brain. Discuss regularly with your partner how it's going. You want to date your wife. Remember that marital satisfaction average that we saw? You got to nudge that back up as soon as you can. And stay involved after the events that really do tear you apart, like separation and divorce. Advice for women. Treat fathers not as helpers, but as partners. The partnerships is the theme of this conference. They're not just your helpers. They can, but they also have things to give your baby that you cannot give them. Support them. The gold standard for you may be different than his. His gold standard is likely to be his relationship with his father. Either it was really good or it really sucked. And he either wants to repeat it or it's the last thing in the world he wants to do. Your desires for him may be quite complex. Not only the way you feel about him, but also your father. But remember, the single most important predictor of whether or not he is going to be positively engaged as a father is your attitude as a mother. You have the key to that gate. in your hand all the time. When you appreciate his presence, that is money in the bank for your relationship. When you denigrate it, it's extremely painful to him. And it's the best way to wind up parenting alone that I can think of. So, close with this slide. Does this make more sense to you now? Does this make more sense to you now? I see a little bit. Some of you are saying that it's even worse now that you've opened these windows and doors to me. But I think during the question and answer, John and I are going to talk a little bit about some of the how-to and some of the why, about how you can be thinking very practically about changing the way that you think about paternal engagement. Because I think of the years that you have been doing this conference, it's taken you a while to get to this topic. It takes everybody a while to get to this topic. Why? Because it's hard to look away from the mother. We love looking at our mothers. We love being close to them. But the pain we feel about absent fatherhood is deep. Father hunger is part of everybody's life. Almost nobody gets enough of their dad. Almost nobody. And it's time for us to change our institutions and our approaches. If we really are going to save more children, there has to be the partnership that led to the formation of the baby. If we can't get that one in the room, then we are seriously in trouble. So thank you for your attention. John and I will do some question and talk. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pruett.
Thank you,
Welcome
John.
back to Indiana.
Thank you. Back home again in Indiana. Right?
Oh, we should work on
That's
that
all I know.
together.
Sorry, I forgot the rest of the words.
So the timekeepers have been telling me, oh my goodness, doctors always go over. Well, you have a psychiatrist. He's also from Yale, so of course he's going to go over. But thank you so much for your comments. I only have time for one or two quick questions.
Sure.
But one of the things we focused on here in Indiana is that many of our removed fathers are coming out of incarceration.
Yes.
And focusing on working with these fragile families and getting them back into the homes at the time of reentry is critical. Unfortunately, many of the social benefit programs really are determined by the father not being in the home. We'd also chatted backstage about now the federal policies around 2-gen, 3-gen, these generational poverty policies tend to really focus on the mom and the child and leave the father out of the equation. Is there any research or your review of the literature that would support and give us some ammo to be able to go back and say we need to do a better job with our social benefit programs?
There is more research than you might believe, John. And this is an uphill battle. And, you know, it used to be that if the man's shoes were in the closet, the mother lost her benefits. I can understand the urge to punish, but I cannot understand the urge to erase the father from the child's life. Who's the child going to hold responsible for that? State of Indiana? The federal government? Why wasn't he around? And very interestingly, although a lot of those men do not live with their children know where they are and who they are. And so there are ways to support their presence. And the data shows we have a number of programs. The National Fatherhood Initiative, NFI.org, has a post-incarceration program about engaging fathers and children, which is quite successful. And it takes on the reality of these men having been removed from their children's lives, and how do they get back into their children's lives in a constructive and positive way. And when they do that, their data show that those children are more ready to go to school, and once they're in school, they do better. They're less aggressive in their conflict resolution. So it's not as though we don't know how to help. We lack the will, and we have not decided to stop punishing these children for what their fathers have done. And I can't tell you how wrong-headed that is, because that's the best way to keep our prisons full, is to keep ignoring that problem. And there are ways to stop and to reverse the trend. And these programs are one of the ways that we know. And they're evidence-based, they work, it takes will, it takes community leadership, It takes organizations like this to say, we have so many of those men, those children are going to stay at risk unless we change the calculus, and you can.
We will have time during our later question and answer period to really focus on why it's taken so long to realize this, and now that we have the data in the research, the social research, to show that we need to move a different direction. We look forward to hearing your comments then. We're going to let the group go on with their break, and we thank you for your comments and your hard work in this area.
Thank you.
Outstanding.
Thank you.